Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to this week's main event. I'm Martin in the chair as always. You've got the famous, I think we may have spoken about it in that first 92-93 show that we did, where Rangers versus Leeds United, a huge fixture, Battle of Britain and all that, the qualify for the Champions League, the first leg at Ibrox, could not be shown live in Scotland because Hearts were playing Slavia Prague, I want to say. They were at home anyway. And Wallace Mercer, chairman of Hearts, with a straight face, said, you might deter some Hearts fans from turning up. Can't have it. So that's why that was. But just a general thing, because ITV had the rights to the English First Division from 88 onwards, 88 to 92 effectively. And that included the big match or the match on a Sunday afternoon. Not every Sunday afternoon, I don't think, but semi-regular live league football on a Sunday. And it wasn't because there was a game on in Scotland. There was quite often no Sunday game on in Scotland. If there was a Sunday game on in Scotland, it probably would be on television. But it was just because the SFA did not want live English football being available, because then people would compare. And that's what I grew up with, that this almost curtain around what was happening in Scottish football.
Yeah, I hated the SFA chief execs at the time. I remember this as a small boy, Ernie Walker and Jim Farry, because they were stopping me watching football. And I used to say to my dad, well, why don't the TV company? Because they're not the same company, but it was just this. It seemed almost surreal to me that the TV company
went, got it, Davey.
We don't care.
Blackout on a Saturday.
Yeah, but that's a law, Martin. This wasn't a law. This
Yeah.
was the Scottish Football Association told a broadcasting company they couldn't do something with their schedule with something they owned.
Right. So,
and I never got why the TV companies put up with it. Now I
think there was. Sorry, I think everyone was that policy I mentioned, unofficial policy, but they were singing from the same hymn sheet, because what was true because of that protectionism is that when there was an Old Firm league game on, or when there was one of the the League Cup final especially played in the end of October, it felt special. Because what else have you got to compare it to? An international tournament every couple of years. The FA Cup final, which happens on the same day as the Scottish Cup final anyway. So the notion that Scottish football fans were bombarded. They only all saw the FA Cup final live if there was a replay, really.
Yeah, that's true.
So it created something special, but that's what protectionism does. I mean, it's long-term futility should be known to many people, but isn't stopping the economic policy of the United States at the moment. But that is what it did. And as a kid, the Skull League Cup final felt like the most important thing in the world. And when Rangers were playing some of those incredible games against Aberdeen, I think it was the maybe the middle one or the first one, on the very same day, Maradona's doing keepy up way all balls, I think it was, before a league game in Serie A for Napoli. He might have well have been doing that on the moon. It is so out of touch. Again, before we get to 92, would we get stuff on a Saturday lunchtime on St. Greavesy? Would you get snippets of European football, or was it only if the goalkeeper's shots had fallen down and he'd missed the ball and there was a bit of walls for Greavesy to enjoy?
Yeah, generally speaking, on St. Greavesy, they tended to stick to only domestic football, but they would do, as you say, they used to do a bit, for example, in Scottish goalkeepers, but they would also do maybe a great goal or whatever. Football Focus was the one that you would see goals. I remember vividly seeing, that very famous Marco van Basten overhead kick for Ajax.
Yeah.
I remember very vividly seeing that on Football Focus one Saturday morning. They would show roundups of the various leagues, basically, almost like you get on the news when they go through, here are today's matches, and you get the goals and whatnot. That's sort of what they did on Football Focus. So you did see it, but it was in clip form. In a way, we've for a lot of the younger generation, we've moved back to that now through social media, which we'll come to. But yeah, it was a really, it was a really, I think, an attempt to keep the world small in terms of domestic football.
Yeah.
But the world was getting bigger.
Yeah.
Television was changing. It wasn't just 4 channels and that was it. We were getting satellite television. We were beginning to get things, even little things like you'll remember very vividly as I do. If you went to America as a kid, you could see a film that your pals couldn't see for 6 months because they didn't commit. Now it's absolutely staggering now. It would never happen that it's not simultaneously released around the world, for the simple reason as it would be on the internet in seconds, and people in the UK would see it. But it was a different time, and it was difficult to find things from different cultures. That was changing in the early 90s. And of course, again, nothing in a vacuum. Maastricht was happening, and the European Union. There was a lot of things that were making the world smaller. We were becoming more global. And as I say, Channel 4 showing Italian football, and now this club competition. But what was very, very noticeable straight away with it, and you and I spoke about this. First of all, you've got this buzz about it. Secondly, you've got this buzz about the way you can consume this product. And thirdly, the product itself. We spoke about this on one of our earlier shows, that you and I were there, the first Champions League game, actually the first Champions League night that ever happened. You and I were watching our team. We were watching Rangers play in it. And the branding was all different and uniform. And at every ground, every highlight that you saw later that evening from the other games, it was all the same stuff. Even little things, Martin, like the graphics. One of the things we used to get when you watched, one of the things I'm sure you still remember, I do very much, is if there was a World Cup, the graphics that were used were the graphics of the host television company.
Yeah.
But you remember Italia 90, we all remember the way that Yes, absolutely. Well, this was different. It was a uniform graphics package. Everything looked the same. So if you were watching, the commentary was different, obviously. The language was different. But the match you watched in Germany or France or England or Scotland or wherever looked the same. And this was new.
It certainly was. Deliberately new, of course. And just to be clear, the Champions League moving to ITV in 92-93. One live game, because we're all played on the Wednesday night, but highlights of the other 3 games, because there were only 4 games per Champions League night before the final, of course. And that was a step up. Even getting access to watching Milan against Porto or whatever, or
immediate access, almost
the other teams in our group were doing. This was new. And again, I know it's a subject I've gone over on other projects and time and again, but I need to stress the point. If you are a kid in 1992, in the summer of 92, let's say you've just got Sky, so you haven't been watching Italian football, which Sky had. Some live games, but again, good highlights packages. Some live Scottish games, but not too many. But ITV still held English domestic games, and they were, blackened. You couldn't see those. There's curtain around those. So if you're a kid in Scotland in 92, and your parents finally, this isn't me, by because we did have Sky, but there will be plenty who did pick up Sky that summer with the Premier League coming in. And all of a sudden, in terms of the live football, if you got double figures in a season, you were probably doing well. Something had happened in terms of, a Scottish club or an English club, having a good run in Europe or whatever. But now all of a sudden, you're getting maybe 80. You get the Champions League, you get the Premier League on a Sunday and a Monday night. You've got proper highlights on the BBC on a Saturday night. Match of the Day is back. And you have Italian football every Sunday afternoon. And this is a gear change and a half. And the point I made in various bits and pieces is that all of a sudden that curtain that I'm talking about, and it's your backyard that you watch football and is so special, no longer exists. And naturally you compare. It's everything the SFA did not want to happen, because interest in Scottish football declined.
Yeah, it did.
You would know who Motherwell's right back was. You would know other teams in the league, because it's really all you had to have that level of coverage. You get it on a Saturday night and a Sunday tea time. That starts to decay. You wait a minute. I can see Van Basten and Lombardo and whoever else on a Sunday afternoon, and then at 4:00 you've got a live English. And also, Davey, you had to have an English team at school, and you have to have, and that might have been the case before. I know you had one when watching the First Division, but everybody now is a casual viewer of that, and you had to have an Italian one. And you're looking at players, and again, you're comparison to the Thief of Joy. There's something in that, but it's inevitable, and you can't possibly not. So I totally get why Jim Farry, Ernie Walker, and the likes didn't want this, because it was over. And also, you can be very, very critical of what your team does or doesn't do, because you're seeing everything else that's out there. And the other one to put in the mix, Davey, before we look at the changing nature of European football coverage, again, I know I've written about it, add in Championship Manager to that in that same season.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, a knowledge of players, a habit of assigning quantitative numbers to attributes, and scouting this and scouting that, and just being immersed in the game itself. And it's no surprise, even by the end of the 90s, but certainly way into the 21st century, why some people online genuinely think they could coach a professional team better, because of the immersion that they have only ever known. And if they know of an Albanian right back, why doesn't Walter Smith?
No, these were all these are all factors, but they were inevitable. That's the thing, that television had erupted, and you go back, incidentally, Martin. These were just things that had been done in different different fields. Same thing was said about music. Same thing was said about music videos. We can't have music videos because then we won't have live performances, etc. The Performing Rights Society saying that live bands are all that counts, all that matters, etc. So it's, if you ever tried to kind of stop and stand in front of the wave of technology and just hold it back, eventually you'll get overrun, as Scottish football did, and you've wasted all that time. Instead of improving your own product, what you've done is just wasted time trying to hold back the river. And that's what had happened in this instance, I think.
Right then, once we're there, we're into the promised land in 92, 93. ITV have got those rights for just over a decade. I think, my quick maths, maybe a decade on the money. How does that develop?
I remember ITV's a lot of people my age remember ITV's coverage very vividly. And I know that when we've been doing the show, for example, a lot of them all Manchester United versus Juventus is one they remember in these. And that was the thing. These heavyweight clashes, these huge matches with the biggest teams. Now these days it's expected. This is what we want, and there's a legit argument to say a lot of people don't get interested in the Champions League until the latter stages, until the top clubs start playing each other now. But back then it was just so novel. Manchester United versus Barcelona that we would see, for example, or Juventus versus Ajax, these huge, enormous fixtures. And the coverage was, if it was Rangers or Celtic, the coverage would be from Glasgow, for Scottish teams anyway, and it would have Scottish television presenter. It would have AN local expert would be brought in. Then it would be the local commentator, and usually an ex-player was brought in. In England, who had more regular live television coverage experience, they went the same thing all the time, which was they had, as we have now, they had their presenter, they had their pool of analysers, experts, and they had the commentary team of Ron Atkinson and Brian Moore, who I always thought was such a delightful 1-2 punch. You had the kind of body uncouth Ron Atkinson, and you had the very genteel Brian Moore, who you could, just I always imagined them, parking the Spitfire outside and coming to work. But
you'd a Triumph Princess, I'm pretty sure.
Good. I can't imagine anything more fitting. But yeah, and this was the coverage of it, and became very much the voice of the Champions League. And other commentators, Clive Tyldesley, I remember beginning to make his name. This was really, I think, when he made his name famously, and Brian Moore retired in the 90s. And Tyldesley was the voice of so many. At Barcelona 99 in particular, I remember famously says, there's Solskjaer, and maybe he can do something. And they score at 1-0. He says, will they score? They always score. Famous bits of commentary that have gone into British television legend. So it was a very straightforward sort of coverage. It started 15 minutes before kick-off. You would have the sort of very brief build up in the studio, and then would go to the game. You would get the commentary of the match. And at the time, and when you look back, the commentators, or that's unfair actually, the commentators know what they're talking about. The British football experts don't have a clue who half the opposition players are. And you can tell that. And they were quite open about it, really. They weren't hiding it in any way. And that's something that just wouldn't be accepted now. I remember actually the World Cup in 2006, and Alan Shearer was on. He was talking about a match, and he said, this is, I think it was Slovakia who were playing. He said, we don't know much about them. And the response to that was actually pretty bad when people said, it's literally your job. And noticeably from then, that became less acceptable. Now, you still have corners of it where there's always this, English football best, and that's fine. But the idea now that you would literally see this totally one-sided thing just does not take place anymore, I don't think.
No, no chance. Absolutely no chance. So why and how did it change? Because that is an ITV thing. By the millennium, are ITV just a bit old hat? They've got the Premier League by now, and they're trying to copy Sky, but it's laughable, really. Andy Townsend, these tactics truck and stuff. Whereas Sky, because they've got the time, they don't need to come in 15 minutes before, or like that World Cup match you're talking about, Davey, where it's a game. They have to show all the games. They will not be given a lot of preparation time for that. Sky do. And Sky enjoy doing that, and they've got the football show and stuff like that during the week where you get an hour-long discussion.
Yeah,
Monday Night Football is now what that's turned into, but they have got time on the schedules to just devote to build-up and analysis, and it's where Andy Gray, of course, made his name as a broadcaster, because he would be showing again this new casual audience why that happened to Aston Villa at the weekend, and he would sit with us in the early days, sit with us at a Subbuteo table, in a dressing room with the Aston Villa captain moving pieces about. Drafts, I think, rather than Subbuteo players, but you get the very kind of rudimentary picture in those days, and I guess as time goes on, where people are used to that, they won't accept it when it comes to European football.
No, totally, and it was very comfortable the way it was done because it was the way it had always been done. I mean, you or I could have produced an ITV television broadcast. You get the Rolodex out, you see who's playing, and you phone one of their ex-players that's in there. He'll come in and do the commentary. And you hire a couple of people to come in and be the panel. Bob's your uncle, and you're done. And Andy Gray might be considered by some now very old hat and a dinosaur and all the rest of it, but what he was doing was revolutionary because he was the first one to say, we're going to talk about tactics. Andy Gray was the first pundit who would come in on a Monday and he'd watch all the games, literally every minute of every game. So if Andy Gray said to you, Aston Villa's striker has been playing well, he's watched his last 6 matches. And now pundits are expected to do that and to know that. They're expected to not just give an opinion that's based on nothing. They've got to be able to back it up. And now, we have Neville and Carragher, and they're the same. They watch everything that happens. So if they tell you that this goalkeeper is playing well at Ipswich, it's not based on 2-minute clips. It's based on the fact they've watched all these matches. Andy Gray was the first to do that. Another thing Sky did, Goals on Sunday, was a big thing as well. Yeah. Where we will go through the matches and we'll break down every match and have a 5-10 minute conversation about it. Sunday Supplement, with initially with Jimmy Hill and then Brian Woolnough, and we'll get newspaper
mainstream terrestrial television doesn't have the time in the schedules for that.
Cannot do it. So you're absolutely right. By then, the coverage is looking fairly laughable. So Sky decide they want it and they can afford it. And of course, it costs a hell of a lot more money now than it once did. And Sky come in and they get it, but they want to do it bigger. The Sky mantra: if we're going to do it, we're going to do it bigger. So it's now no longer right. We're just going to show one game. It's that we're going to show multiple games. We've got more channels, Martin. ITV can't do this. At the time, ITV have got one channel, right? They were beginning to look into things like ITV Digital and stuff, but it wasn't really taking off. Sky can say we've got 3 sports channels. We can have a game on each channel. We can do this.
ITV had tried it with ITV Digital, with the ill-fated ITV Digital that basically finished ITV really as a
it did as a
power and nearly finished the Football League. That, of course, the 3 divisions underneath the Premier League, because they all hitched to that wagon, and it was a farce. But they did have that kind of multiple. The Champions League's now moving to 2 nights by that point. It's again turn of the century. But what Sky did in 03-04, as we talked about in when we covered that season, isn't just we've got Sky Sports 1, Sky Sports 2. That even that's old hat by now, because they've been doing that before. That's how they did the the 95 final day league decider, where United were at Upton Park, Blackburn were at Anfield. They were on both the Sky Sports channels. But by 03-04, it's red button. There's your choice of all the games tonight, all 8 tonight, all 8 tomorrow night. Fire away. You can watch any game that you want live.
Huge, absolutely huge.
So it's just taking the technology, the depth, the quality of production that people were used to with domestic football, and applying it to the European stuff. The game is growing in terms of knowledge, I think, through the 1990s, because you're getting something, which is a hell of a lot more than you were getting pre-1992. But the appetite's there. I'm not saying this flippantly. Things like Championship Manager were another driver in that. People want to see as much as possible. They can't just live on reading World Soccer every week or month or whenever it's out. There's just that appetite for more. And with that, in that decade, that first decade of the 20th century, certainly 21st century, but certainly now, European players, because the Premier League still isn't quite the business. 03, 04 is when Sky took over. So I think you're going to get a lot more household names coming from places in Europe that you just simply didn't have before. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts and breakdowns dropping every other day.